Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Drive the Conversation, our brief portion. My name is Jewel Ifeguni,
And my name is David Wang.
and welcome. All right, so Breonna Taylor. So on March 13th, 2019, Breonna Taylor was sleeping in her home next to her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker. And apparently, there was a silent raid that was called to her house because there was a tip. And yeah, they were just trying to go. And I don't even know how to summarize it because the whole thing is insane. But they were basically they followed like the no knock rule. They didn't knock. They were trying to raid the house for drugs or something. But as soon as like they got there, 20 shots were fired. While she was sleeping in her bed, 8 of them hit her and killed her. So we are here to really talk about what happened that day and also the fact that after 6 whole months, she still didn't really get justice. I know there was a settlement and only one of the cops got charged, and it wasn't even for her murder. But, I'm going to stop it there so we can really talk about what we know and what we don't know. So, David, kick us off. What do we know and what do we not know?
Well, I think a good way to start is following the timeline. So, given what little we know, and based on revelations that were presented to us in the last few days, uh, initially the police was they asked for the no-knock warrant to search her residence because they believed that drugs were being sent there that were actually related to another person they had already arrested by that time. Uh, this warrant is the first layer of weirdness in all this because we don't know if it's justified. The United States Postal Service has an inspection arm, a law enforcement arm that deals with detecting and investigating illegal packages, and the postal inspector in question explicitly stated that no package of notes was going to that residence in the first place. So now the legitimacy of this warrant, whether it should have been issued in the first place, is now in question. Upon arrival at the residence, what the new testimony presented to us was that the police, despite having a no-knock warrant, apparently they knocked, and this is based on eyewitness testimony, apparently, and which at that point, Kenneth Walker, who is Brianna's boyfriend and living and spending the night with her at that place, took up a legal firearm. It was a legally owned firearm
Mm-hmm.
and fired a warning shot. And that warning shot was the spark that caused the return fire that killed Breonna Taylor.
And let's make sure we emphasize fire. Like there were multiple shots, like, and they were outside the house too. That they were outside the
Yes.
house. And wow, wow.
Yes, from what we know, the officers didn't enter the residence. They just fired through the door and the window, and and then she was killed basically in a sort of a blind spray kind of situation. And the worst part is, in the aftermath of this, it was Kenneth Walker who was initially arrested and charged for her death, even though he was the one who fired the warning shot, and there's no evidence to suggest that he fired any shots afterwards.
Let's just pause for a second. Like let's take that in, right? Her boyfriend who was trying to protect her. Now they try to twist it and be like, okay, no, it's you, right? Not even taking the responsibility that those shots hit both of them, hit Breonna Taylor, killed her, and then they twist it and they say, no, it's the boyfriend that did it. I just want our viewers to kind of understand, like there was already, things they were trying to do. So sorry, keep going.
Yeah, and the another detail is that Walker, being a legal firearm owner, firing from a position of defense in what is essentially a legal action, the fact that what he did was justified under Kentucky law and under the firearms laws and the regulations and the use of it, and still he was the one that was initially charged with Breonna Taylor's death is kind of an indictment of the system of that is working over there. And the YouTuber Colion Noir was also a big advocate of the Second Amendment. He did also a breakdown on this particular issue and how that there is a double standard in the way that the Second Amendment is exercised in this particular context.
Mm-hmm. It's like with black and brown skin, it doesn't matter.
Right. And what happens next essentially is this case goes into stasis for about 6 months.
6 months. So let's first pause, right? 6 months, 6 months of protests, of her being on magazine covers, on her being on billboards, of everyone saying Breonna Taylor. Like at this point, like we have been calling for justice. We have been really, we even reformed. We even there was a law, right? Breonna's law, which was like the no knock warrant. But yeah, David, tell them what happened 6 months later.
So 6 months later, during the 6 months, it was assumed that the Attorney General of Kentucky issued an investigation, and the purpose of this investigation was to see if what the officers should be charged with, if they should be charged. Shortly before the official decision, a $12 million settlement was agreed upon between the city of Louisville and Breonna's family. And this $12 million settlement, um, it sounds much better than it really is. It really is actually a little bit insulting.
Tell them. Tell them.
So the $12 million settlement does not come from the Louisville Police Department. It doesn't come from a budget cut. It comes from the collective funds generated by the taxpayers of Louisville and also by state and federal taxpayers who subsidize that town, which means that we pay the restitution. The people of Louisville and us, we pay the restitution, but that restitution does not come from the police department who is responsible and complicit in this act. And
we are paying
yes.
for these officers, like we're paying for what they did. And I think it's even less emphasis on the fact that like we're paying for them. It's the fact that this is when people are saying like redistribute basically the funds of the police. Like this could have come out of there. And even if we talk about the amount, like $12 million, according to some other cases, that is nothing. Like if a white woman was shot and killed and unarmed, I don't have the case with me right now, but from what I saw, one woman got $50 million in terms of settlement. So not only is it an insult because of the fact that it comes out of our pockets, but also the amount, but also no amount of money can bring Breonna Taylor back. And I think that's just part of like the root of it.
Yeah, exactly. And so even in the case, it destroys the idea that there was some justice being served. Oh, they paid restitution. Well, they didn't actually pay restitution. They made us pay their restitution for them, and that's very unfair, obviously. And so now we come to the actual indictment decision. And so this case, investigated by the Attorney General, was presented to a grand jury. This grand jury was not necessarily selected for this specific case, and it is in this particular process, the Attorney General's office presents evidence. The prosecution presents evidence to the grand jury, and the grand jury has to agree above a 9 out of 12 threshold that certain charges must be presented or dropped against these officers. And so the result of this process was that one officer, Brett Hankison, was given a first-degree charge on wanton endangerment. We will go more into that.
I was going to say, you clarify that.
Yeah, and Miles Cosgrove and John Mattingly were relieved of all charges. They were not indicted. And this is where the legal mumbo-jumbo gets really, really frustrating and perverse. And so there's a lot about these cases that we don't know. So obviously there's information missing where we might be operating on 10% of what the total information is, or maybe 5%. I think the only people that could truly know are those 3 officers and Kenneth Walker and the eyewitness that was allegedly there giving testimony. But given what we know about Kentucky law and given what the grand jury process is like, the evidence that the prosecution presented to them actually suggests that this decision to only have one count of wanton endangerment is exactly how that legal system was supposed to work. In other words, Kentucky law would have protected those officers for those return fire. And the issue is this. The idea is that the moment Kenneth Walker fired the warning shots, under Kentucky self-defense laws, the officers are justified returning those fires. So the grand jury has no choice, if presented with that particular information, than to not to indict. And this is where obviously we can see where the legal parameters, the legal decision and the moral decision are not matching with each other. There's a disconnect between the legal and the moral.
And there's just a lot to unpack there, right? So first you got 3 cops that we clearly know were firing shots, but only 1 is charged. And not even charged for murder. What was he charged for again?
Wanton endangerment, which is where he fired indiscriminately into a window and the bullets might have gone to a different apartment room, a different residence. And so it was property damage and the risk of endangering the neighbors of this residence rather than this residence itself.
So a property, the bullets meant more than Breonna's life. Like just let that sink in for a second. And also, like when you're explaining like just the legal system and how it's basically set up to I can't even find the words. It's set up to really mess people up and not really have any humanity in it. So Kenneth Walker
Yes.
was protecting, he had every right to protect his family, his love. And that is the one thing that's being used to justify this murder is it's beyond words. It's beyond words.
Yeah, and we can also question the integrity of the Attorney General's office. And this is entirely separate issue from his political affiliations. But there's evidence to suggest that the prosecution or some of the actually the defense, the Louisville defense attorneys who were in charge of defending the officers, they attempted to get Breonna's ex-boyfriend, who was already in jail, to implicate her in one of his crimes, which means that they wanted to justify that no-knock warrant. And without that, they couldn't do it. And so they tried to find multiple different ways to skim the system and to add buffers to protect themselves. But at the same time, I think the big takeaway from this is also that the law, as it is in Kentucky, allows this to happen, regardless of who the Attorney General is, regardless of his political affiliation, regardless of the Attorney General's race, origin, background. It is possible that any other Attorney General of a different political persuasion might have been forced to come to this same conclusion, not because this is bigger than the Attorney General's bias. This is based on the entire law structure of Kentucky itself. And so at these points, a lot of the purposes of all these protests, it's not really to say, well, we need to hold them accountable under the law. It's that the law is not accountable to morality. And that's a much, much more serious challenge and a greater obstacle to overcome.
Well, yeah, I guess like to be like the counter, who was the Attorney General's, what was his name again? I try not to even remember.
His name is Daniel Cameron.
He sucks.
He's one of the his mentor was Mitch McConnell, which essentially implies a lot about what his political persuasion might be. So we can I think it is a legitimate concern. The biases and the inclinations of the Attorney General might have impacted the integrity of the way that he investigated these cases. We can compare it to what Keith Ellison did in Minnesota for the George Floyd case.
Exactly.
Keith Ellison wanted justice. Now, the law in Minnesota prevented him from charging the officer who killed George Floyd with first-degree murder, but he was able to get an indictment on the second-degree murder charge. Because, once again, that is what the evidence and the law that we have can say, regardless of our personal feelings. But Ellison's limitations are that he can only ever go to a second-degree murder indictment. In this particular case, even if the Attorney General acted with perfect integrity, we could expect perhaps a better result. But under Kentucky law, we should not expect anything near satisfactory or in terms of justice that must be served.
But I think what's very telling, regardless of what we should
Hmm.
expect, because I think it's general knowledge, like the system is broken here.
Yes.
And it becomes even more apparent of how broken it is when you're dealing with Black and brown lives. Is right before they said the announcement, they already like bubble wrapping, bubble taping, Louis, like they knew what they were doing. They knew how outrageous this is going to sound to a newly awakened nation. Because when we think about it, right, if this was to happen before the video came out on George Floyd, right, it would be the same group of people, a lot of our community speaking up, being pissed, trying to take action, and everyone would be like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? But now when we have the whole nation's awake and they're like, oh, like this is a problem, this is still happening. So it emphasizes, yes, the fact that the system is broken, but also they understand this is not right. They understand it's not right.
You're absolutely right, and I think the most serious indictment is not that they can no longer use the "I'm ignorant about what happened. I didn't know this was happening" arguments.
Exactly.
Yeah, the fact that those barricades and preventative measures were being put up before, I think, in the week before that the official announcement suggested that they know to some extent that this verdict will not serve justice. They already know in their hearts and minds that that this is not going to work out. If they did, they wouldn't bother putting all these measures up.
And I think it's important to remember, remember why people are protesting. This verdict, obviously, justice was not served, but it's also telling people, Breonna Taylor's life did not matter. Black women's life does not matter. Black lives do not matter in the system. And that is why people are protesting. That is why people are not only calling for justice, but for a system to be changed. Because at this point, like you've broken down, David, like it's already set up for failure, regardless
Yes.
of who you are. And it's just annoying because we keep having all these people who die for no reason. She was young. She was a frontline worker, an EMT protecting us from COVID. She had just begun her life, and she was taken away too soon. And there's this really great like tweet or something I've seen where again she's been used on magazine covers, billboards, people have worn her shirts, she's been used for parties, and the one thing she didn't get was justice. And I just think it's very representative of how specifically Black women are treated in America. So it's just, whew, it's a lot.
Yeah, and one has to wonder how many of these cases were not thrown into the national spotlight.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
and because at the end of the day, if a legal system permits a scenario where an innocent human being is dead and
Mm-hmm.
the people responsible for that death are essentially not charged with anything related to the death, um, that's the sign that this legal system, even though it worked because it was designed that way, that legal system is, shall we say, screwed.
Very screwed. Very screwed. Well, to wrap this up, because we can keep going deeper, but we're going to go deeper into this in our next panel. I'm going to leave us with a quote and then kind of transition to how we can continue this conversation. So I go back into saying that with this verdict and what it tells about what it means about Black lives, but I think it's very important to recognize that throughout this whole time, these 6 months, right, the amount of coverage that Breonna Taylor got in comparison to other people, specifically males, very much highlights the fact that it is, we won't go too deep into it, but just intersectionality is very important. And intersectionality is the idea, intersectionality means that you belong from multiple different groups, right? So Breonna Taylor she's Black, but also a woman, right? So when we think about these cases, Black women are often covered a lot less, even though a lot of us are the ones that are literally leading the charge. 3 Black women, remember, 3 Black women are the founders of Black Lives Matter. But I say this because Malcolm X has this really powerful quote. Let me make sure I say it right. He says, the most disrespected person in America is the Black woman. The most unprotected woman in America is the Black woman. And the most disregarded person in America is the Black woman. So it's just, with what came out with this verdict, it is something that I guess wasn't surprising to anyone, but it further deepens like just the fact that our lives are not valued in this country, especially Black women. And when you're trying to have these conversations with people who can't necessarily understand what it means, at least bring the humanity into it. Breonna Taylor went to bed next to her love, thinking she was going to wake up and continue her life. And like that, it was over. And now we're talking about her today. So, wow, this was, it was good just being able to like have a brief about this. David, you're an amazing co-host. And we are going to dive deeper into this in our next panel. So we'll see you all next time.
Until next time.
Bye.